Holy nostalgia.
On today's episode of Nostalgia 101, 90s class is back in session with author Scott Ryan. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Nostalgia Test Podcast, and welcome to Nostalgia 101, where Manny and I get to learn a little bit about things instead of screaming about them all the time. And Manny, how are you doing tonight?
I mean, I think sometimes we still scream in class. So
Okay.
I'm good. I'm excited. I remember when you sent me an email about this, and I was like, oh, perfect. 90s. This fits really well with our 2024 is the year of the 90s, which I feel like we started the trend, Dan, because we started this in January, and now all you see is freaking all 90s things coming back. I heard Jankos might be making their way back, like, what? No.
No, please, no.
It's gonna happen. We're gonna start seeing like the widest jeans ever. So I'm excited. So let's get right into it. I'm gonna be interrupting a lot.
Okay, great. Okay, so and today we have a great guest, author Scott Ryan, to talk 90s cinema. Scott, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I don't want to start with an argument, but I started the book 4 years ago. So I realized you started your rinky-dink podcast in January of
Listen, we started the podcast way before this. We started it during COVID, like most podcasts now have started.
Well, it was the law in COVID. The only way you could get the PPP money was to start a podcast.
Absolutely. Exactly.
No, Dan and I we're like talking all the time, and I guess it was just a way for us to like stay in touch during the, I'm in New York, he's in LA. But that was started over 4 years ago. But this year we decided we only wanted to really focus on all of our episodes being about something about the 90s music, pop culture, like movies, whatever it was, remakes that we hate. Everything. But I will listen. It's in our blood. I'm assuming you're a '90s. You grew up in the '90s to write a book about.
I'm a Gen Xer.
Okay.
Okay.
So
do you mind if I ask the year?
I was born in '70.
Okay. So real Gen Xer. Okay.
I was in my 20s throughout the '90s.
All right.
Okay.
So you were really paying attention.
Yeah, so these movies, they were kind of marketed to me, for me, and we're in 2024. 30 years ago was 1994, which I pick as the best year of movies in the 90s. I think 94 was the best year. So we're right here in the 30th, and that's why I wanted the book to come out this year.
All right, awesome.
Wow. So, I mean, let's just get right to it. I mean, definitely tell our audience a little bit about yourself, because now I'm ready to like jump in. But let our audience know a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then I would love to get back to this 1994 thing, because it's a big year, 94, actually.
Heck yeah. Well, I am an author and I host a podcast as well. Okay, so I do a podcast on the Massillon Tigers called Tiger Talk, which is a football team. And excuse me. And I've written 10 books, and most of them are really 90s based. I cover Twin Peaks a lot, which was in the 90s. And I do a lot of David Lynch events. And so that's sort of been my bread and butter. I know that I should be writing about things that people actually care about, but then you could make money or be successful, and that just wouldn't jive with me.
I mean, it's a true 90s
we get it.
Just not be that successful. Like push through really like high fidelity way. Just like it's not about
what else would we complain about?
Exactly.
And
like if we were rich, I mean, even rappers started to suck after they started really making money, and like all they're talking about is how rich they are. It's like, the struggle is real, and that's what we like to hear. So
yes, exactly. That's right where I'm from.
So I'd love to jump in and just kind of ask about 1994 real quick. I mean, what was it about 1994 that you feel is this pinnacle time in 90s cinema or pop culture?
Well, the three movies that I cover for 1994 are Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption,
Mm,
and Reality Bites.
hmm
And I mean, that is it right there, a really, really strong year. I mean, Pulp Fiction changed everything in the 90s and is certainly going to be in the conversation for the best movie of the 90s.
mm.
But for me, being from Gen X, Reality Bites was the first movie made for Gen X.
Ah,
It was the very first time in my life that I saw my generation. I didn't even know I was part of a generation. I didn't know that other people thought or cared about the same things. And then it
right.
was all in this movie. And that was a very strange experience.
Mm,
After that, even by the end of the 90s, by 99, they were making a lot of teenage movies.
yeah.
So every generation after that was very used to seeing themselves on screen. But before Reality Bites, and then Singles was also made
Mm.
about that generation, but those people were a little bit older than me. But they just weren't reflecting us. And then both those movies failed, and I don't think anyone's ever made another movie about Gen X. And it just went right to boomers and millennials, and Gen X has never been heard of from again. But I'm
Was
here to
Kids?
tell
I
you,
guess Kids was a millennial movie. Kids,
yes,
right? That
yeah,
was
because
yeah.
that's in the 2000s.
Yes.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I
Interesting.
will agree.
Wow.
First of all, Shawshank Redemption. Every time it's on,
You
So
can't not
good.
watch it.
yeah. Even though it never really gets on like the most like people for some reason think it's like a cheesy thing to say that they like that movie, but like it is constantly when they used to only have cable and you had to, the cable networks had to buy a whole thing of movies. They always bought Shawshank because
Hmm
it's like the most watched. Like people watched it all the time. I remember, damn, we used to watch it constantly,
It's a great movie.
constantly.
It's
It's
a
a
great
great
movie.
movie,
It's a great
and it's
movie.
pretty long. And I'm like, I
Very
don't
long.
mind at all watching it.
No.
I'll just be like, all right, here we go. This is what we're doing today. We're watching Shawshank. It's like kind of trying to like, you stumble on a Rocky marathon. You're like, am I
Oh
watching
boy.
Rocky right now? Like,
Yeah.
Of
possibly.
course, you're
Well,
even gonna suffer through Rocky 5, but
Yeah.
oh,
still.
I mean,
you're
that's the
going
only
to.
problem about the '90s is that the Rocky 5 came out. Like the worst movie ever. We did a marathon on this show, and it was such a struggle to get through that one. Even though I
Oh my
knew it
God.
wasn't going to pass, I was like, we have to do it anyway.
No, you got
And
to.
I mean,
Yeah.
whew, that
Yeah.
was a tough one. Yeah. All right. 94, I will have to say, I'm like looking up all the movies that actually came out that year, and it was a pretty damn great year.
Yeah.
Lion
Yeah,
King came out in
Wow.
94. So rest in
which
peace.
James Earl
Yep.
Jones, yeah.
Wearing my Star Wars
Absolutely.
shirt. Yep. I mean, that's amazing. And then I like this idea too, that Reality Bites, seeing it as a movie. I mean, and you're saying like the only film you feel that like is a Gen X reflective. Like it's like this is Gen X. And I'm thinking and I'm like, well, I yeah, I think you're right. I don't think because I don't consider because even like Empire Records comes later, I believe, and I
They're a little
don't know.
younger.
It's definitely not Gen X. Clerks would be like still. I mean, it feels more millennial type Gen X
And
because me.
Clerks came out in 94 as
Okay, well
well.
there you go.
Yeah.
So it is, I think, and Clerks wasn't trying to speak for a generation, although I interviewed Helen Childress, who wrote
Mm,
Reality Bites.
mm,
She's in my book. And she would certainly argue with me that she was not trying to speak for a generation by
right,
any means. So
right.
I don't want to put words in her mouth.
Yeah,
But I think Kevin Smith was just trying to speak for a very small area in New Jersey, and he
right.
certainly did. I mean, of course, I loved Clerks. Like, it blew my mind when I saw,
Oh,
speaking of Star Wars, that was
yeah,
like the first time that you really
yeah,
thought about the Death Star. And then you're
yeah,
like, yeah, they
yeah.
just
Yeah.
killed all those
I
workers.
love that film. It's such a great moment in that movie, but and as I was preparing for you to come on too, I was thinking of the 90s and thinking of these films in the 90s. I'm like, there's just there's just so much cleverness to like the banter and the dialogue between characters in these films. I mean, just the three movies you named, like Reality Bites, Pulp Fiction, and Shawshank, the dialogue and is just genius, and it feels so real. And I would say too, like Pulp Fiction is one of those films where it, yes, visually is amazing, but if the dialogue is
Right.
so right on, and
And
now,
how it was shot
yeah, well, yeah, and
and
edited,
edited.
yeah. But
Like,
now it's like,
when did we see something like that?
yeah,
Like,
nothing. No, I've never seen anything like that. But now
it
it's
took
like
me
the,
years to watch that movie, by the way. And I know that there's a quote that you say something about like that you wanted to bring up the fact that we used to all argue about movies and
Right.
not kill each other and not destroy each other online about it. And it was so much fun. And I remember anytime I would bring up, and I was a film major in college, and I would bring up that I hadn't seen Pulp Fiction yet. My friends that had seen it so many times over, they're like, it would blow their mind that I didn't do it. And I finally watched it, and I was like, why did it take me to watch? Why did it
So
take
let me
me so
ask you
long?
a question. Did you
Yeah.
watch Forrest Gump?
Yes.
Okay, so see, I have never seen Forrest Gump.
okay.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
I
Wow.
feel that in 94, there were
yeah,
two people. There were Pulp Fiction people and there were Forrest Gump people. And of course, it led to one of the, and what in my opinion is the most famous Oscar telecast of all time, which was when David Letterman was the host. And he
oh,
was all Pulp Fiction. And
yeah,
of course, Forrest Gump wins everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
So it became a disconnect. And that was
hmm,
sort of what was happening right at that time, where Pulp Fiction had come along and just cracked movies open and
yeah,
said, look, we don't want to see movies like we've already seen. We want to see something new.
hmm,
Yeah. We don't
And
want to see blockbusters, I guess, if you want to
yeah,
call it
well,
that.
but they were blockbusters. I mean, I'm not trying to bust you on your word choice, but that's one of the things that I've had about like promoting this book is explaining this is not a book about unheard of small movies. Like,
mm,
I mean, I'm covering Pretty Woman and Goodfellas
yeah,
and Malcolm X and Unforgiven. All these movies made hundreds of millions of dollars and they
mm,
played at the mall.
Yeah.
So there is a book to be written for small movies like Clerks and all those independent films that
yeah,
happen. But my book is not that.
mm,
What I wanted to say is that the actual popular movies, the things that we were all consuming, were actually artistically based and made you think and feel and sometimes get pissed off.
mm.
And we were
Yeah.
all okay with it.
So what do you think like I'm thinking of like films now, and I don't go to the movies that often. One, it's super expensive, especially in LA. It's like very expensive to go to the movies. But there's all this talk now too about like cinema not being the same. There's even Quentin Tarantino has like talked about how cinema is dying, or like all these Marvel movies have destroyed, our understanding of cinema. Um, what is, do you, what are your thoughts on that as well? Like being some, like looking at the blockbuster film, these popular movies that made hundreds of millions of dollars in the 90s, people going to see movies like Malcolm X and Unforgiven and things like that. And now it's almost like pulling teeth to get people to go to the movies. Um,
Well,
I mean, there's an expensive to it, but still, like it was still not cheap to go to the movies in 90s money. I mean, if we're like thinking of inflation, what is
Right.
it that it's missing, you think, that the 90s had possibly?
Well, obviously I believe it because the name of my book is The Last Decade of Cinema.
Right.
So like
Yeah.
I'm starting off right away punching everyone in the face who loves these Marvel movies, and I get that. Like that I'm like, okay, there's chocolate pie over here, but look at this cauliflower. Who wants it? So I understand that. But what I actually think is missing
Mm,
is risk.
mm,
So the thing like that I feel like both of you said about Pulp Fiction, when you first saw it, whether you saw it when you should have in 1994, or later on when all your friends were like, look, you cannot come to the party until you've watched Pulp Fiction.
yeah.
Um, it blew your mind because Quentin Tarantino took big swings.
Yeah.
And he could have failed or he could have succeeded. It's just luckily he succeeded. You can't take a risk in a movie about a guy who can fly. You can't
Okay.
take a risk. You can't do it like because he can fly.
Hmm.
So like if he needs to get from here to and if you can grab the bus in your hand and stop the bus from going over, there's no risk, there's no humanity.
Hmm.
And that is why I think people aren't really willing to leave their home. There's no reason to. We all know how the movie's ending before we
Hmm.
even went.
Hmm.
We know how
True.
Iron Man 4 is ending. We
Mhm.
saw it in Iron Man 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, and they could be like, no, this one's different because they have a girl villain.
Yeah.
Who
Ooh.
also looks like the hero. Like
Yeah.
all the villains look like the exact opposite of the hero. They're the same costume. I'm just like, you just
Yeah.
change the color.
Hmm.
That's all
Hmm.
you do.
Hmm.
So that's, to me, that's why it's not working right now. If a film is taking a risk and also this fear of missing out,
Hmm.
where like I didn't want to be the person that didn't see Pulp Fiction. Like I saw Pulp Fiction in the theater as soon as it came to my small town because
Mhm.
I'd heard about it playing at Cannes and I knew that, it was supposed to be different. I didn't know what it was about, but I wanted to see it before my friend.
Yeah.
And I think that still does exist where people have that feeling, but there isn't a story and a character
Hmm.
that is making us really rattling us in
Hmm.
the movie theater that makes it worthwhile.
Hmm. Hmm.
Disagree?
Well,
Agree?
No,
I'm
I'm
a
trying to
tad.
think.
Disagree?
I'm trying to think. There's a couple of things that now, I mean, so, so I was trying to think if we were having this
By the way,
discussion.
I'm drinking out of a Burger King
I
Batman
saw
cup.
that.
That's awesome.
And I think it's
Yo,
actually
you just
from the
showed that,
90s.
and my brain went to that commercial. Like
So
I'm remembering it.
also I use it. It's not that I hate superhero movies. I have a Batman cup. I'm just
Okay.
Yeah,
saying I don't only want them, but it's just funny. I'm like, really, out of all the cups I grabbed, I
that
grabbed
is
the
hilarious. That is.
Batman cup.
I mean, in
Yeah.
the 90s,
Uh,
the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles like movie was a gigantic hit, and that's
fantastic
a
movie though.
superhero film that's based on a comic book. But I'm gonna say like the thing that you said about humanity, that's the thing. Because when we watched Ninja Turtles on this podcast, it was like the third episode, and we were like, I
Such
rewatched
horrible
it.
sound back then.
Yeah,
We've
our
gotten so
podcast
much better.
sounded terrible, but
Uh,
like the movie was in itself, like the Ninja Turtles lived in the movie, like everything was lived in the film, right? Like it was not CGI'd. It was like they were there.
Right.
So it was interesting because it made me feel like I could walk down the street and see the Ninja Turtles, and it was dark, and it was like so there was something going on, but there wasn't the humanity part of it because they did all sorts of stuff in those movies to like get us to connect to these mutant turtles. Where like I think of even these newer Jurassic Park movies, and I'm like, I don't want to see it.
Right.
I don't
Well, you've
want to do
seen
it
it.
anymore. Yeah, because how is it going to end? Dinosaurs. Someone's going to die.
And
T
also,
Rex
how's it
comes.
gonna begin? They found there was one more DNA strip that Newman didn't put in
yeah.
the right container.
Right.
I'm waiting
Right.
for the movie where they show that the freaking the shaving cream thing that got like mud
Finally.
over it, that they finally like someone finds it
They haven't
years
done
from
that. I
now.
assume that's how all
No,
the ones Chris
they
Pratt needed to shave,
no.
and all of a sudden a dinosaur fell out.
Yeah, they haven't mentioned. I was like, where's that Easter egg? Like, where's that Easter egg? I want to.
Eh,
They
My
should do it,
gosh.
but
no.
no,
Yeah.
they haven't done it, and it's just
No.
gotten. I've watched every single one,
They're
and it's
bad.
so forgettable.
Yeah.
Like they're just so like. Yet I remember the first one like it was yesterday. So like this storytelling is like no one wants to really even try anymore because it's like
No.
well it's
Well,
easy.
And
So
even I sort of have been falling into it because I just saw that Steven Spielberg is going to direct a Goonies sequel with the
I,
original cast, and it's going
yeah.
to be 40 years later.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, well, that's kind of cool. I love the Goonies. And I was like, no,
wait,
don't get caught into that. We've already
yeah,
seen it. Why isn't Steven Spielberg like blowing us away like he did in Schindler's List?
he doesn't
Mm.
have to anymore.
Yeah, I mean and nobody everyone's afraid to take a risk and
And
all of
Yeah.
I feel like, so here's the problem, like with podcasts even like this where we want to talk about 90s, we want to bring back nostalgia. Also, people are seeing that that's a money maker. So it's like, okay, well, the Goonies were huge. Even though wasn't that like in the 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is an 80s. Yeah, the
But like
Goonies.
people
Right.
like I remember, I was born in 81, so I was the cusp of X and millennial,
Yeah.
and I don't want to see I don't want to see a remake of the Goonies, and I don't want to see a sequel. People who listen to our podcast know that I'm really big on not doing remakes or whatever, because you're never gonna capture that generation's feeling. Like movies that the writers, the people that were directing, the people that were hanging out, the drugs they were doing or the drugs they weren't doing, like it came out in that movie. Like
Yeah.
cheesy 80s movies weren't made to be cheesy. They were just 80s movies, and we now
Right.
say like they're freaking cheesy, and it's like, but awesome. And I can't believe Roadhouse was like that. But like you do it now, and you're like, that sucked because you can't get that. Say, what are you gonna do with Goonies now? Like
Right.
Mm,
what I don't. To me, it's just a cash grab, and that's.
mm,
I was gonna bring up this like this conversation that we're having. Let's say we had it in 2008 and now we're having it now. There's so many added things that came from it now. Now you get streaming on everything. So there's good things about that and bad things. There's now you can get low budget movies are being streamed everywhere. A lot of creators came out of from everywhere, are able to make movies, are able to stream TV shows, but that necessarily doesn't mean that quality stuff is coming out.
mm.
Or we're seeing so much now that nobody wants to go to the movies because I got this little thing that I could just watch 5 second clip things of. Like we've been programmed to
Right.
not want to even watch a 2 hour movie. You know, like
Yeah,
it's
have you
nuts.
guys seen the movie Magnolia?
I
Yes.
haven't seen it. Yeah.
So
Is that
that's
what that's Tom Cruise? That's
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise. That was a really interesting role for him. Yes,
Mm.
I have
It's
seen it.
actually the last time he really acted. I mean, it's the last time he did a drama. Then he's
Yeah.
pretty much only done I Can Run and Jump. Look how high I can jump.
Have you seen that
But
YouTube video of like him just running? Like he runs marathons. It's great.
he's
By the
gonna
way, I
save
love
us
Tom
all.
Cruise. I have like a weird thing about him, but that go ahead. That is the last time he's acted and not just been Tom Cruise.
But that's where my book ends because
Mm.
Oh,
Magnolia
okay.
came out in 99 and it's funny that I'm not going to remember how long it is, but I think it's 3 hours and 8 minutes, but don't quote
Wow.
me on that. But when I was watching the movies, I made my 24-year-old daughter watch it with me. I said, look, this is really a good movie, but you got to put your phone down. Like
Mm,
we're going to have no phones
mm.
and
No double screen.
we're gonna watch it. And I said, we'll stop halfway through. You can check your phone, we can get a snack, and then we're gonna go again.
Mm,
We're gonna take like a 5 minute thing. And the end of the movie, I'm not gonna spoil it, but you know, you've gone a long way to get there.
Yeah.
And it just ends with the camera on this person's face. And I'm just like, oh. And I look over at my daughter, she was already on her phone. She
Yeah.
didn't look at it. She didn't look at it when the movie was on. But
Wow.
like the
No.
credit came up, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, and
Mm,
she was on her phone. And
Yeah.
I thought, and I write about it in the book, and that's when I was like, yeah, there's no purpose for Magnolia.
No.
Like
mm,
nobody wants to be away from their phone for 3 hours and 8 minutes.
mm,
No.
They didn't really care about this. She said the movie was good. She was like, yeah, I liked it. It was kind of long, but yeah. But
mm.
Yeah.
I love Magnolia. Like I crawl inside Magnolia
It is
and
an interesting film. Dan, you haven't seen it?
I gotta see it. I know it's on my list.
It is a very interesting film. Yeah,
Mm,
it was good. There's so much going on. I want to talk about it, but this is not that episode. But
But I think,
it's crazy.
I think like I'm continually, everything you're saying is just so poignant because it continually goes back to that idea of humanity, right? Like in storytelling and human stories. Like I feel like a lot of the things that you even talked about here, I mean, Pulp Fiction, Shawshank, Reality Bites, these are all character stories. These are all stories based on people's lives. Not to say that, first of all, Reality Bites and Shawshank, these things could have that's more like I could walk in that into the everyday world. Reality Bites is like a real that feels like the world, right?
Right.
Pulp Fiction is a little more like outrageous, but it's not too outrageous, right? It's not like, like you said, like Superman coming down from another planet, picking up a bus and tossing it into the, whatever. So there's also something about that where like there's much more reflection of an empathy building between the viewer and the character, right? That's why I love movies like, you know, I don't know. Now with the passing of James Earl Jones, and I'm like went back to like look at one of my favorite roles is from Field of Dreams, and I'm just like,
oh, he's so. Who the hell are you?
Yeah, my favorite part. That's one of my favorite parts.
I want to answer the door that way.
Yeah,
my whole life. If
Yeah.
you knocked on my door, you could really get. Who the hell are you?
And then that baseball speech. As soon as it starts, I'm crying immediately. It's done.
Of course.
But there's a thing that I feel like people had, like whether Gen X, the millennial Gen X, like no man's land people, like
I guess
me.
they call them us or
yeah.
some centennial. I don't know, some
Yeah.
shit. There's a name for it. The people that grew up without
We call
phones.
them the people.
The people that had smart beepers.
Our stories were about people where like it started to get so poppy and then outrageous and crazy and things being like, I don't want to see the world. Not say there wasn't movies like this that were escapist movies, but like it's so much more of that now where I'm just like watching 10,000 Spider-Man movies, right? Like, so like and it's recycled. Like the movies that are out now, like Romulus, it's like it's another alien film. And then there might be a newer film being streamed that you don't hear about. So like I think like because it was funneled into the movie theater too, they were taking risks and people were making money. And now it's just like there's like a sacrifice for story in order to make the money back that you put into this like $300 million film.
Right.
It's just like,
well, that's why I covered Pretty Woman. And it's early in my book. And I think it's, I feel like it's the movie that people could be like, Pretty Woman, like, isn't that a dumb rom-com? But what I love to point out about is that the B plot in Pretty Woman is him buying a company that made weapons in World War II that saved all America so these people could get their money in the 80s and putting them out of business. That is the B story in Pretty Woman. And
he was like acquisitions, right? He was that's what he did for a living. Yeah,
but I remember think about if they made a romantic comedy today and then someone was like, oh, what should he do for a living? And they were like, I know, how about destroy companies who helped save America? And they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? We're making a rom-com. I'm not putting that in our movie. We'll get boycotted. But that's why I wanted to point out that like even the movies from the 90s that someone might be like, isn't that where Julia Roberts' hand gets clipped in a necklace box? Like that movie's shit. And it's like, no, when I watched Pretty Woman, I hadn't seen it in a long time. I was like, this is a quality movie. You care about the guy who runs the hotel. You care about the chauffeur. You care about her roommate because every character is developed. And that is what is gone from making movies. They're not even making Pretty Woman type movies. I don't know. Do they even make rom-coms anymore? I'm not sure they do.
They're trying to bring
that's
it back,
funny you said it. They did. Yeah, they recently did one. I think it went right to streaming. That's the thing.
Right.
Problem is like once you hear right to streaming, that's like straight to DVD kind of words.
Right, yeah.
But yet, that's how you're watching movies. Unfortunately, that if people don't want right to streaming, then go to the fucking movie. But like they're not, so they're like, oh, we have to do it this way. They try to do it with the guy who played Iceman in Maverick.
Yeah,
and
Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney had a
Sydney
rom-com.
Oh, that
Sweeney. Yeah,
Anyone But You.
it was pretty good,
Okay.
I guess, if you like rom-coms. I watched it with my
It's just
wife.
so
Like,
exciting.
you
So
know,
excited about
listen, I like Pretty Woman.
movie.
I bring that up. That was my mom took me to that. It was funny. Me and my sisters went. I still remember I was in the second row looking up, and I remember asking my mom what a blowjob was because the part with the condom or whatever. And I mean, she answered it, but like, I mean, I don't think I was old enough to be going to this movie, but I
No.
like it. I think it's
But
still.
and you know
I
that
know
is
the different scenes. You know.
that is another thing that I talk about in the movie is because they weren't making every movie wasn't targeted to little kids.
No.
Mm-hmm.
When I grew up in the 80s and I'm watching movies from the 70s,
Mm.
those movies were over my head. So
Yeah.
I learned to watch movies and not know what's going on every second. That's the other thing about me showing a 90s movie to my kid. They'll be like, what's going on? Why did they do that? And I'm like, you'll find out.
Yeah.
Why did this happen? You'll find out.
Yeah.
You'll find out is not allowed to happen in a movie anymore.
No,
You
absolutely
know
not.
right away why everything happened.
I remember.
Can't be lost.
I remember that. My wife used to be like when we used to date and we'd go out to movies, and I'd be like, "Oh, I think this is what's gonna happen." You know, like you would try to
Right.
think about what was gonna happen, and I was pretty good at it, and now it's like it's just so predictable. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you're saying, you're right, like because like you can't be allowed to, like you can't. You need to tell me everything. I need to be, my hand needs to be held the whole way through. You need to
Right.
explain everything. The jokes have to be right on. It can't just be like a dark joke or whatever, maybe subtle thing that happens here. It's like it's I guess we've
Well,
created
it's what we
that.
want. It's
Yeah.
what we've wanted. And that's what I say in the book as well. I'm not saying that the 90s was some magical time when art won out.
Oh no.
It just happened to be that what actually made money was what was new. That was the other thing. In 1994, all the top 10 films, top 10 grossing films were original ideas, not one sequel, not one IP in the
Wow.
entire top 10 of 1994. Can you
What was the top
imagine that
5?
now?
That's
I don't know it
amazing.
off the top of my
Oh,
head, but
okay.
I'm probably sure it's Lion King, Forrest Gump, I don't know, probably some Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, I think I list.
Yeah, I'm looking at like what was out
If
then,
you look
and
at the top,
Color of
mean,
Night was
Speed
around.
probably was up there. Um,
So it's Lion King.
In
Here we go. Highest grossing films in 1994. Lion King at number
Forrest
1.
Gump.
Then Forrest Gump, True Lies, The Mask,
Okay.
Speed, the
Mask
Flintstones.
got on there.
Sure,
Wow.
Yeah,
Jim Carrey,
351 million.
Yeah, he was
was
golden in the 90s.
Actually, he's got 2 movies on there. So it's The Flintstones and Dumb and Dumber, 4 Weddings and a
Okay.
Funeral, Interview with a Vampire, Clear and Present Danger.
See,
Dude,
all of them.
Interview with a
10.
Vampire was such a good movie.
Oh, yeah, really great.
Mhm.
Such a good movie. That was remember, Dan, we were like trying to think that Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise had never been in a movie together. And
Yeah,
like
and then it was
someone
that.
was like, "Oh, you know, is that?" I was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that
right.
movie was
Right.
great. That was
But-
awesome."
See, I love this because it's not even about, and I think you're right, like Scott, what's interesting, and I love what you said, like it's not about the idea that art won over. It's just like good, well-developed, fun movies won over. Because Speed is not an art film. Speed's an action film. Speed is a Keanu Reeves action
Perfectly
film.
done though.
Amazing. Speed 2 trash. But like
Right.
Speed 1, it's not like Oscar winning like acting either. It's what it is. But see, that's
Well,
the thing
Dennis
Manny and I
Hopper is a great bad guy.
amazing.
Yeah.
But see, that's
Yeah.
the thing Manny and I have figured out, like too, like a lot of the movies, especially in the 80s too, that we find cheesy, they were out to make a serious film. So like Roadhouse was not made to be a cheesy film in the 80s. It was made to be a serious drama action film, but we find it to be that way.
Right.
Speed was like, we're going to make this really crazy, amazing action film. And I think the changeover from action to being like, we always have to be funny as well in the action films kind of ruins the action genre, because in the 90s, action was action. Like
Mhm.
Speed's not funny. There's not a lot of funny things
There's
going
some
on in
moments,
it.
but I don't know if they did it on
But
purpose. I
it's
mean,
not
there is
like
some moments.
exactly, but it's
They're
not
like
like
human moments.
purposely. Yeah, it's
Right.
not like now that sarcastic humor that's just like in there because we put that in there. It's more
Like
like
Bad Boys 4.
right. Yeah. It's more like this is funny because this is ridiculous and what he just said is crazy. You know,
Yeah.
and I think the 90s knew like it still was riding that. Point Break was not funny. It was just like a strict action film in the 90s. That's all it was. It was nothing funny about Point Break. But I think like as it went on, it was like, well, people don't want to, we need to like mix this in there. And it like diluted some of these genres out a bit, you know?
Mhm.
Do you talk about comedies at all in your book? Like
Yeah, I mean,
Major League?
I don't think Major League's a 90s movie. Pretty s- is it 89?
It might be 89
Because
because there's a lot of movies out there.
I didn't
Oh,
watch
this is
Major
Major
League.
League 2. Yeah, that was fucking terrible. Sorry.
Yeah,
Never
I
mind.
was gonna
Yeah.
say Major League is a good movie though.
Oh,
I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah.
I love Major League,
they
but
don't make
it's not a
comedies like
90s
that
movie.
anymore.
Um, when I was starting the book, I was going to do a chapter on each genre, like do comedy and do drama and do
Mm,
horror and do, all this stuff. But I dropped that really soon because
mm,
I thought it's better for me to pick 24 different movies
yeah.
and just drill really into those 24 movies.
Yeah.
So there are comedies in my book. I cover Clueless
Ooh,
and
it's a good one.
Pretty Woman and Citizen Ruth, which I think is funny. That's probably the smallest movie that I pick.
Mm,
But I didn't do any like Adam Sandler or something like that.
right.
I watched them, like I watched Tommy Boy and things like that, but none of them. There had to be something to write about, and sometimes just
Okay.
like it was. Oh,
I
Big
get it.
Lebowski's in my book too. That's certainly
Oh,
one.
well,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. That was a good one.
Yeah.
These
Um,
natural born killers in your book?
It is not.
What did you think about
It's in
that
the
one?
back of the book.
mm,
Okay.
My rule was one per director, and
okay.
JFK is covered in the back of the book.
Yeah.
So I couldn't, you had to do JFK over Natural Born Killers. And I've got Quentin with Pulp Fiction. So
Yeah.
the idea was to say there was variety, not just like do every Martin Scorsese one. So once I did
Right.
Goodfellas, that means Casino was out.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine. I mean, I
Yeah.
like Casino, but I mean, I'd rather watch Goodfellas. I
Yeah,
think.
Goodfellas is, that's what
Yeah.
I start the book with. And that's the
Mm,
thing. Like to
mm.
get to start the book off with Goodfellas,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm starting with a pretty good argument
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Absolutely.
second.
Yeah. I was
Even his
thinking.
last movie I didn't care for. The one
The one about the Native Americans,
there's
Flower Moon, Killer
oh, I
Flower
didn't
Moon.
see that one. I heard that was good.
It's okay. It wasn't great.
What
It
about
wasn't.
the one where what's his name is they call him a painter? He was the what was it called? The Irishman?
Oh, The Irishman. It
It
was
was like
okay.
4 hours, wasn't it?
I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know this idea that because I shot it means it has to be seen. There was something good about deleted scenes. Like, could we cut something out of a movie?
I missed that
Yeah,
on
I agree.
DVDs. Yeah. I was gonna ask you because in the email it said something there was a about in your bio and everything that you got to interview Patricia Arquette
For True Romance,
for
yeah.
True Romance. That is one of the I think I saw first Quentin Tarantino movie I saw was Reservoir Dogs, and I love that film. I think that you can actually do a play; it can all be set on one stage. Um, but and then after that it was Pulp Fiction, then True Romance, I believe. And when I saw True Romance, I was like, this movie was wild. Now I was curious, like when you talk to her, like what you talked about, I would love to know, like were there some surprises and things that she kind of let you in on, or especially that scene. I mean, her character is so important in that brutal fight scene between her and James Gandolfini, which is like one of the
Well,
craziest
the
scenes.
first thing is, I always wondered why Patricia Arquette was so good in everything, and the answer is she is smart.
Yeah.
She remembered every single thing about her character. Um, and I would say this is the most fascinating thing. We of course talked about the James Gandolfini scene, but the actual scene that she said was the hardest for her
Mm,
was when Christian Slater comes back
mm,
having killed Gary Oldman.
mm.
And then he's yelling at her, and then she cries, and she's like, "It's just the most romantic thing anyone ever did for me." She said that was the hardest scene for her because she
Mm,
was like, he just killed someone. Why
yeah.
would I love him?
Mm,
And she said she had to work out with her acting coach, and she really struggled with that. And she finally came up with she's afraid of him in that
mm,
moment, and she's
Ah.
doing what she can to survive. And she
mm.
said the audience may not get that or whatever, but that's what I had to do to believe. And I thought that was really fascinating. And it made me realize how much work these actors put in,
Yeah.
that was going on in her mind to
Wow.
to figure out every moment that she played.
Mm,
Um, it was pretty freaking sweet that I got to
yeah.
interview Patricia Arquette, to be honest with you.
And she's the only reason to see the movie Stigmata. I mean, that's like that movie is not really it's super 90s and things of what it is, I believe. And but she's so good in it. Like
She's always
I
good.
love that movie because she's so good in that movie. That movie's wild and weird. That's awesome. Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah,
Damn.
it was really cool. I wanted us to become best friends. Didn't happen. Um, but it was kind of fun because I forget whatever the first question I asked her was, and she got disconnected and hung up.
Oh no.
And then when she called back, I said, "Really? That question made you that upset?" And she was like, "Yeah, I'm mad at you, Scott." And then she went on and answered. And I was like, "Oh my God, she made like a joke with me and said my name. Like, I don't even care if I write the book. Like, I have this moment, and that's good enough for me."
Oh
I
man.
love that.
You
Is there a movie? So you those are your top three in 90, like 94. Is there a movie that you still would consider like top five that you're not that you haven't mentioned that you know
Um,
stands out?
well, I mean, I really love all of these. I have to look at what else is in the book. What have we not really talked about? I mean,
oh,
a movie that I feel like most people have forgotten is The Ice Storm. Have either of you ever seen The Ice Storm?
No.
no.
I really
Whoa.
think there's a chance that it's one of the best movies ever made. Now, it's got Kevin Kline, Christina Ricci, Tobey Maguire, Sigourney Weaver, and it's 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 a drama certainly about marriage, but it's
Mm,
set during Watergate, and it all happens in a key party in the 70s where all
mm,
the couples put the key in, and then you're going to take
Hmm.
out and you got to go home with someone else's
hmm.
That person,
husband.
yeah, it's like swapping wives and
Yeah.
husbands. Yeah.
And it makes you so uncomfortable, and that's what I sort of wrote about, was one of the reasons I wanted to cover it. It's directed by
Wow.
Ang Lee, who of course gets famous for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. But
Yeah.
the
Wow.
amount of uncomfortability you feel, because the first thing you think is a key party, sweet, like I want to go to that, like, oh, this will be awesome. But then start thinking about someone's going home with your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and then who are you gonna get? And it makes you so uncomfortable that while I was watching it, I was like, oh God, I love being uncomfortable in a movie. No new movie makes me uncomfortable because
Mm,
they've edited out anything that will make anyone uncomfortable because they just want you to buy their shit that they're trying to sell.
mm,
Yeah.
Nobody wants you to be uncomfortable.
mm.
And so it's one of my favorite movies.
I
I
gotta check
suggest
that
you.
one out.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Like you want like it was okay to make people feel uncomfortable or like because I mean life is uncomfortable, right? I mean you
Right.
mentioned even David Lynch. I mean I took a whole course on David Lynch during my PhD and we watched everything that he did, every single
Oh,
thing at
what
that
what
moment.
did you like and what did you not like? If I
Um
can ask you a question, is it legal for the guest to
Oh, sure,
ask
absolutely.
questions?
I really loved, I mean, I loved Twin Peaks. I mean, the whole series I thought was great. I think of course it went off the rails once he left a little, whatever. But I thought Twin Peaks was really, really fun. Because it's quirky, right? It's like,
Mhm.
and the idea to me that was on national television, like that was on
In the
regular,
90s.
Mm-hmm.
that was on regular TV, which was amazing.
Yeah.
His movies, I thought I liked them. There was one movie that stuck out because it was rated PG or G. It was
That's
about
the straight story.
I love that one. It was
Yeah.
so weird to think that was part of his part of everything. And then there was one and then I got upset. I mean, I think Blue Velvet, I like that. And I mean
I like
the
Lost
one
Highway.
that
That was
Patricia
crazy.
Arquette, that was one with Patricia Arquette, Lost Highway.
Yeah.
That movie was wild. It had like I didn't know what was happening.
I
And
still remember the scenes of just seeing the yellow lines,
that
like
Yeah.
movie was
flashing. The
crazy.
camera work was crazy in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
book
Yeah.
is my Lost Highway book.
All right.
Wow.
So I
Oh
wrote a
my
book
God.
about Lost Highway because when I interviewed Patricia Arquette, I interviewed her about Lost Highway and True Romance. So I
That
double dipped and wrote two books because I got an interview with Patricia Arquette. That's basically how I write my books, is
yeah.
because I get the interviews and then I build a book around them because
That's
it's so hard to
amazing.
get.
What
Yeah,
do you
why
think?
not?
So, Lost Highway, like, do you find that there's something in there? Like, I, as a student, I was like, I don't know what's happening here. I know there's a story, and I
It is.
don't.
It's actually the most simple of all David Lynch's stories, honestly.
Yeah. Well,
Which is why I think it's maybe his best film,
mm,
because it actually is very simple.
mm,
Bill Pullman is being electrocuted for murdering his wife. And
hmm
in that last moment of electrocution, he imagines that he's this young guy who can fix a car and do anything in the world and gets to bang Patricia Arquette and be super cool. But it eventually this fantasy doesn't really work, and there's so much electricity in it, and you can
mm,
just sort of tell that then at the very end he's trying to continuously outsmart the police. It doesn't happen,
yeah.
and at the end when he's driving away, his face is getting all messed up because he's getting electrocuted. He's in the electric chair.
Ah.
So
So
it's
it's like a
actually,
Jacob's Ladder syndrome. It's like a
yeah.
Jacob's Ladder. Wow.
But David Lynch just never tells you that.
No,
So
he doesn't
it's
tell
sort
you
of
anything.
funny in the book. I interviewed like the DP and the screenwriters and, just
Wow.
like everyone, the cast members. But then I'm real quick up front. I'm like, hey, this is what the movie's about, but let's forget about that. Like, how'd you
Yeah.
make the movie? How did you film that dark scenes? And like you're saying, like the story of how they shot that highway was really hard. It was hard to get that shot that you
But
remember
it's
it.
imprinted in my brain. Like I
Yeah.
still remember, like there's certain movies that I just like that lives rent free in my head. Like in random times that I'm like thinking of nothing and my narration in my head is going on. I'm like, why am I thinking about the David Lynch movie where like, like I even forget the name sometimes and I'm just like, I just see the
You're
and
just
you
on
know
a
what I'm
highway
driving.
and you don't know where
Yeah,
you
yeah,
are, but
yeah,
you can't think of
exactly.
Lost Highway.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, why? And I was like, I don't remember what the rest of the movie was really about. I just
Oh, I just
remember
ruined it for
how great it's no, you didn't. It's all right.
you.
How great it was. It's like,
Yeah.
but would you watch that movie again and again and again and again?
Um, I mean, I have, and it was interesting. I go around to David Lynch Film Fest and host the
Oh, wow.
events because
Okay.
I also do a magazine about Twin Peaks called The Blue Rose. So I'm very much
Okay. So
in
you
the
really do.
the
Yeah.
David Lynch world.
Yeah.
And I had just written my book, and then I went down to Dallas and we were showing Lost Highway, and then I was going to go talk about it. And then I watched the movie, and the book was all done. I'd finished it, whatever, 4 months ago. And when I was in the theater watching this movie, I thought, who the hell am I to think I'm going to explain this movie and talk about this? Like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
Just because I interviewed Patricia Arquette, I read a
Yeah.
whole book about this. I
You
don't
got
know
all
what
high
the
on it.
fuck this
Yeah.
movie is about. And I really panicked. But luckily, no one asked me what the movie was about. They asked other questions, but
Thank
I just
God.
started
That's
to sweat,
hilarious.
and I thought,
Yeah.
That's
I don't
funny.
know what
It's like
this movie's
imposter
about.
syndrome. Like,
Yeah.
wait.
It's like when it's like if I went to see when Inland Empire came, it was, my friend and I were in the class, we saw it during class, and then they were playing it near me when I was living in Astoria in Queens, and he came and he saw it, and he's like, I'll be right back. He had to run to the bathroom, and he came back, and as a joke, he like whispered to me, he's like, did I miss anything? And I'm like, shut up. I was like, no, yeah, what? And like I just started laughing in the movie theater because it's one of those things like, but see, that goes back to what you're saying. And though Inland Empire is not a 90s film, it's made by a director that is like literally like he did these amazing films in the 90s, and you have like Wild at Heart, which is like really amazing.
Love
It's
all
the
that.
chances you could take, right? I mean, he's a visual artist who then writes and directs these films. So, but you're almost like asked to take these risks in these 90s films, even if they were like crazy swings at like what the internet was supposed to look like in the movie, like
Right, yeah.
the Hackers, something like,
Oh
which
my
was
God,
a
I knew you
total
were gonna bring.
fail.
I'm like, he's gonna find a way to
But
bring hackers into this
but they
damn
took a chance. They
conversation.
took a swing at being like, okay, this is what we have to explain hacking. We have to explain. We have to show what this looks like.
And
And
make people
they took
rollerbladers. Like, what
they
do you
took this.
mean?
Well, I
That was
mean,
like that's the definition of like the 80s cheese, 90s trash. Like that was just like some
but
there
it's
were
fun.
movies that were just
It was fun.
whatever, like and fun, whatever, but
Yeah,
like it was
yeah,
ridiculous. It's
yeah. But they
although
take a big swing and they just like are like, let's cross our fingers and just make sure and just hope this happens.
Right. You were expected to try, not
Mm,
repeat.
excellent.
yeah.
Yeah. Damn.
What's your favorite independent film of that era?
Probably Swingers.
Yeah.
We just had an
Um,
episode about that.
did you guys
Sort.
think it held up?
We haven't
I
actually. We
really
didn't talk
think
about
it.
the
Oh,
movie. We
We
what do
we
talk
were
you
like,
about
think?
we talked it got brought up as in like we talked about the era of like why did the dance craze
Oh, so like
make
Big
it
Bad
into
Voodoo
the
Daddy
yeah, the
and
yeah like
resurgence.
and
Yeah.
the fact that
Royal
they even
Crown
made
Royal.
him yeah like we
But we're
were
gonna do swingers.
we
We
have
have
to
to.
I think it'll help I think the dialogue alone in some like there's people who repost certain scenes of that movie and I'm just like this is like them in the car just like how they talk to like the
Right.
dialogue was great like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
nuts.
The topic that I write about for that movie is that they allow them to be male. It is
Mm.
such a male movie, and when you watch it in 2024, you realize how we're not allowed to make movies about men right
Hmm.
now.
No,
Everything has to be female based. And it's okay. Maybe men had their time and it's time for it to switch this way and it'll flip back. That's how
Hmm.
everything works. But when
sure.
I mean, Vince Vaughn is just a dude in the movie, and
Oh
they
yeah.
talk like dudes and they treat each other just like dudes treat each other. It's
Hmm.
just we don't see that
Well,
anymore. So
yeah.
it was very refreshing to watch.
Yeah. And I think with that movie though too, like John Favreau does a great thing because he's able to also he does a good he Vince Vaughn's character is like pedestaled and then knocked right off of it. So it's like
Yes.
this hyper masculinity that you're seeing, like John Favreau makes a commentary on it afterwards. He's like, look, he's what he thinks he is, but guess what? Like, and so I think like because they're smarter, there was a smarter like understanding of that film is able to kind of still, I think, well, we'll see when we do, like hold up because there is a commentary on it and it's just not there just because like I think he learned, like John Favreau's character comes into his own, is like, I got to be my own kind of man
Right.
here. I got to take charge of like the individual that I am. So I mean, I rewatched even SLC Punk in the last couple months and I was like, whoa. I was like, I don't see movies like this at all either. Like, you can't do this. Like, that's the thing I'm saying always. I'm like, you
Right.
can't make this movie. This
Yeah, and
movie
it's
only
not
exists
about
then.
canceling the people who made them
Yeah.
back then, because just what you're saying is true, that the Vince Vaughn's arc in the movie only happens if he's a complete asshole
Hmm.
in the front part of the movie.
That's right.
And then eventually you start to see, oh, this is a front.
Mm.
And you sort of do swap places with Jon Favreau. And you can't do that in a movie now because no one's allowed to act that way. And
Mm.
it's like
I mean,
we're
no one's
not
allowed to
all
evolve and
perfect.
change.
No,
Like,
no, because they'd have to, at one point, either they're going to go from a good person to a bad person or a bad person, good and bad in quotes, of course.
Hmm.
They would say something bad. One of the movies that I wanted to cover, and I do 55 more movies in the back of the book where I just write paragraphs because
Wow.
I couldn't get them all in.
Wow.
One of those was As Good as It Gets.
Oh,
And
love. I
um
just rewatched that film like a few months ago. So
and it was so good, but I was like, Jack Nicholson character would be considered problematic
oh
today,
yeah.
oh,
but he's described as the worst human being ever.
Hmm.
That's a description of him. So who thinks the worst human being ever is going to have evolved thoughts on racism and religion
Hmm.
and sexism? Like, no, they're going to
Right.
have the worst thoughts.
Right.
So we learn from him as he goes along, but I didn't want to get into it because I didn't want, I tried to stay away from that stuff from the book because
Yeah. I mean, it's
did you
funny
bring
because you
up
say,
Usual Suspects?
not really because when I watched it, I was kind of disappointed in it, to be
You
honest with you.
were.
I
I
haven't
didn't
seen it
think
in a
it
while.
held up.
Oh, that's funny because that
Have you
at
seen
one
it
point was one of
recently?
my favorite. No, and I wanted to put it to the test because I remember this was being passed around in VHS.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
Everyone was watching it.
like people were like, dude, this is like, because you would argue who's Kaiser Sose, and the best
Right.
part of it was like, you're arguing all the
No.
different stories that were made up. So like,
Yeah.
there was this cult following of it, and I was like blown away by it. I haven't watched it, and you
I
weren't
actually
impressed?
looked and I do cover it in the back of the book. I couldn't
Okay,
remember if I did or not. But when I watched it, I really wasn't impressed. It pretty much is kind of it's like a one trick wonder almost. Like it
Mm.
just I remembered the twist, and it's good
yeah,
if you don't know the twist,
Hmm.
but when I was comparing it with other things, there wasn't a lot to say about it
okay,
Mm.
outside of the twist.
I
yeah. I mean, I remember that it was supposed to like blow up this director, and I mean, I haven't really been impressed, but I do remember that I was bringing up the fact like the rewatch value of certain movies. This is definitely like a maybe it's just one and done because like
Yeah, it
if
kind of is.
it's like watching Sixth Sense. You're like, oh,
Right.
I don't need to. Maybe I'll watch it again to see.
Right. But then,
Although Fight Club, I'll
right.
I
watch that all the time, even though whatever. I don't want to spoil things here,
Right.
but I mean we spoil things all the time.
spoil
But
things. It's 2024. If you
yeah,
have not seen
I know,
Fight
but
but
Club,
it's
like
so hard if you love a good ending.
yeah,
yeah.
Like, why take that from someone? Because you can talk about it and get around it.
It's,
I'm always so amazed how people will ruin a movie
well, I will say
so
Fight
quickly.
Club was ruined for me by one of our friends,
oh my
Jeremy
God, I remember when that
the
happened.
Duck.
Jeremy.
I will
Jeremy.
shout him out. He was on the Mrs. Doubtfire episode and the forthcoming Metallica episode of the Black Album. But he ruined Fight Club for me,
I
and I
can't believe he
ruined The
did
Usual
that.
Suspects for him. So like
Did you?
Oh, so
right after that, I was
Oh
like, because
wow,
he said what he
this is
said
an
about
eye for
Fight
an eye
Club.
right there.
He said what he said
Shit.
about Fight Club, and everyone made this face. I'm like, you son of a bitch. And I was like, well, guess what? And I was just like, man. And he
ah,
was
Yeah.
like, and I was like, hey, man,
hey,
you know,
you started it.
I mean, that's an eye for an eye for there.
Man, I guess
Yeah,
I mean, now I don't know if I want to waste my time on Usual Suspects that you
it
said
was
I
that,
mean,
but
short.
maybe we'll talk
yeah,
about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
it is short.
So
We need to get short movies back.
yeah, well,
It's
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
that's
it's
that's a
been
whole
way
other thing.
every I don't want to sit through a 3 hour movie.
We
Like you
have a
said, like I mean, you would sit through one that's good storytelling and like really like how long is Goodfellas? Is that
two and a
that
half
long?
I
hours.
think it's probably 220,
Yeah,
225 would be
Yeah,
my guess.
like that storytelling is just so good. Camera angles, everything, the
Right.
yeah,
music, the beat, the way that
Uh,
the cuts are happening, it's all purposely done. And
yeah.
it's now I'm like, who's telling stories like that? Who's like what?
Not
What
even him.
movie?
No,
No,
it's too
I
shiny.
mean, what's up?
It's too shiny. Like that's the
Yeah,
thing. I feel like, and I was gonna ask this question, like from the '90s, like when you cross into the 2000s, I'm curious, like what you felt was left behind immediately. I know we talked about humanity and we talked about these things, but do you feel like, especially as you cross into that and that next, into that next space into the 2000s, the movies, I mean, they changed dramatically.
Sure.
What is it that you feel like got left behind and made,
Well,
and that transition is so,
yeah, my last essay is called Fear Conquers Art.
mm,
And I say it didn't really, the 90s didn't end at ni December 31st, 1999. It's not like the first movie released, I think, was Friday or Friday 2. And I was like, they didn't all change there.
right? Because Friday's
It actually
genius.
was 9/11.
Mm,
So it really, so in 2000 and 2001, you were still having these kinds of movies. But when 9/11 happened, it's like everyone said, I'm out. I'm not getting in trouble because that's when we started to blame people for things. And that's when artists started to get in trouble. And so I talk about seeing Spider-Man in the theater.
mm,
And because that came out in that summer, the following summer. So summer of 2002. And I don't know if you remember what the last shot is,
yeah,
but it's an American flag.
yeah.
And that really is the end. Like,
Mm,
why is there an American flag? Why does Spider-Man jump from thing to thing to thing and he has to go all the way? Like, and what I basically say in the book
right,
is
yeah.
they're basically telling you that Marvel and George W. Bush and Spider-Man all have your back. So just eat popcorn and shut the fuck up. And we're gonna take care of you. And we never
Mm,
really take a chance again.
mm.
So that's where I say it ends. But
wow.
good ending? Hey,
I,
we had a
Nah,
I,
fun
d-
no,
guest.
I
He
think
really brought
it's funny. I
everyone
was just
up.
thinking American
I,
Psycho was a year before, was in 2000.
yeah, you can't do that.
So you can't, you couldn't do that.
And
Like,
No.
Donnie Darko was
but that was still
2001,
kind of the cusp
but
of the 90s, right? Like that was
Right.
still taking chances. Like
Yeah, but
yeah.
imagine
I'm sure
again.
those movies were written in the
And
90s.
Donnie
Yeah,
Darko too. Like
sure.
Donnie Darko, I think was like that last movie because that came out in 2001, but I think it was pushed back because of 9/11. It was supposed to come out because it's about a plane engine
Donnie
that full
Darko's
like
opening scene is phenomenal.
yeah.
It
But
was
then
like
that was it.
such
Like
it,
that was a
it
movie
was
we
so
all
good.
hung on to, like because it was just
Yeah.
like wow, like what is this? But you're right. That's really interesting that that's the last shot. And I'm thinking like then you have all the flyovers and NFL games. You start like getting the all that. Wow. Hmm.
Yeah, we
I
get
mean,
where
there's
now
been
all of a sudden artists are trying to make us feel safe and protected. And why? Why are you doing that? That's not your job. And
Yeah.
I just don't think they wanted they don't want Spike Lee to push our buttons anymore, and all
No.
that goes away after that.
Well,
Um,
they didn't want Bill Hicks pushing anyone's buttons even in the 90s. I mean,
right.
like, it was just but he was there, and he was doing that work and that's really interesting. Wow. Well, Manny,
there's
y-
I forget what somebody had mentioned about 9/11 being like it killed a lot more than just movies. There was so many other
well,
things.
we
But
got
yeah,
in
we changed
trouble.
as a culture. We changed as
Yeah.
just
We
even
let
like
fear in.
how the internet
Yeah.
went to like let's do the conspiracy theories. Let's just
Yeah.
get fear. So it was like,
And didn't
yeah,
we,
that's really interesting. Man,
Manny,
that
you were
sucks.
part of, did
Really
you
I
come
know,
to the
sucks.
aren't I a good
movies?
guest?
Yeah.
He
No,
wants me
it's
to come over and
just
pee on
no,
our
no.
birthday cake.
I
No,
think it's
Yeah.
it's great.
I love it, Manny. We're right at the end. I mean, Manny, anything else before we close out? Because this has been crazy, amazing
No,
conversation. I feel like we can go on
I
for another
did
hour.
remember something like you had mentioned. I saw some of the blurbs about like digital versus film, like what was it, the 33 millimeter,
35 millimeter
35
versus
millimeter.
digital. Yeah.
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 Do you think that just adds to just forget about the look of it, but storytelling just becomes not as great because it's just too easy now, or is it it's just like, yeah, we can shoot anything because it's just kind of like how people take pictures now. It's like I take 1,000 pictures. I have one great one. Where when I was shooting in film, like I said, I went to school for film. You didn't just film. Like you plan things out because like it costs a lot of fucking money to develop that. So like I want to make everything right. And now it's like, okay, well, we could just hours and hours of digital, no problem. Let's just do whatever, and it doesn't have to be great.
Yeah, I mean, I lay the blame at George Lucas's feet.
Okay.
So take that with your shirt. So when Phantom Menace came out,
Okay.
it was 1999. It was shot on 35 millimeter. And he told all movie theaters that if you wanted Attack of the Clones in 2002, you had to have a digital projector. So they had 3 years to throw away their 35 millimeters, and they all did. Now, what do you think those people wanted? Did they want another Ice Storm? Did they want the Prince of Tides to come in? Or did they want another Jar Jar Binks? Because I got this digital thing, and now I can shoot this digital thing up there and have a digital character. So, I mean, that's why it happened.
Well, dang.
This is
And that
facts,
was
guys.
crazy. Yeah, I know.
That's amazing. That's sad and amazing all at the same time.
It's crazy because there's people who revere him as like, you know, this god, and then he could have also just killed so much creation just by doing that.
I mean,
alone.
he did Star Wars and Howard the Duck. So I mean,
Dude,
But he
Howard the
also
Duck.
did one of my all-time favorite movies, which is Tucker. And that's an 80s movie
oh, about the car maker.
about the car. And that's why
Love
my
that
publishing company is called Tucker DS Press, because I do everything out of my garage and I'm like a self-made.
Yeah,
Dude, Tucker was
that's amazing.
That speech at the end when
Love
he's
that movie.
at the courthouse. That was
my heart.
It's great.
Yeah.
Movie,
that's a big statement right there.
Well,
about like
movie.
what the big, what big companies could do and how government could destroy the guy who's just trying, the independent guy. So I remember we watched that. We watched that in
school, some sort of class.
In some sort of class. And another movie that I still remember him looking out and the cars that were pulling up to the parking lot. What was it like? They said like 49 of them at that time of the movie. 49 existed and stuff. Just
amazing.
Great. The freaking wheel turn and the lights turning with it. Like, it's crazy.
I love it.
Oh, man, I could go on and on and on. I want to get other things disappointed. Like,
that's what our podcast is all about. Disappointing everyone and making sure your childhood has been ruined. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like definitely we just scratched the surface. I'd love to have you back, and we'd love to have you back again. Talk about movies.
I want to do one movie with Scott, and then we'll put it to the test and go through it and just dissect.
We should do a 90s film together and dissect that film.
Yeah, like if you want to do a David Lynch thing, I could come back. I'm good with 90s, so there's probably most.
I might want to do Lost Highway just because I haven't seen that and I want to get that out of my head. Maybe like it'll finally be released.
That movie was
just be in your head
or just be even worse to be like, what did you do to me? Like I can't sleep now.
When I just a side note, and then like we're gonna close it out. But like my friend and I, when we took that David Lynch class, I wrote my whole paper, a 25-page paper on just the audition scene in Mulholland Drive where that girl's singing that song, and that song I had listened to it like 150 times. Yep. We would walk through the halls and through the thing, and I would see him and be like, da, da, da. And we're just like, like losing our minds during that class. But amazing class.
All right, let us. Where can people get this book?
And
they can get it on Amazon, or you can go to tuckerdspress.com And when people buy it there, I sign it to you and send it myself. Because, like I said, I'm just like Tucker. This is a very small business, but we have like 40 books now and a bunch of authors, and we just got signed with Simon and Schuster, so we're growing the company.
Amazing.
So it's all happening. And I'm on Twitter at Scott Luck Story.
Okay.
So people can follow me there, and I had so much fun. I would love to
Guys,
come back
go
anytime.
go on the website and
Buy
not
this
on
book.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Buy it directly from.
Yeah, then people hate that. They want to give the money to the richest person. They want to go to Amazon.
No, what it is they don't want to
They
wait
wanna-
for the shipping. They just want it tomorrow. I get it. I mean, there's
Right.
certain
I
things
mean,
that
I'll
need.
ship it. I ship it as soon as the
There
order.
you go.
As soon as you get the
And
order,
they
Ship
make me
it.
happy. Like
He'll
I'm
make
like,
him happy.
And you
He'll
get a
make Scott
signature.
happy. You'll get it signed,
Yeah.
and he ships it right away. People,
And then-
Scott's information will be down in the show notes. Follow him on Twitter. Support the company and buy this book. It's an amazing conversation. Scott, thank you so much. And everybody, share this episode with everyone you know. Like and review. Manny, I'll see you in the next test. Scott, thank you so much. Everyone, peace.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please subscribe to the Nostalgia Test podcast to know when new episodes drop. Don't forget to leave us 5 stars and a positive review so more people can find the podcast. Share your thoughts and memories on today's topic on our Twitter at Nostalgia Test and on Instagram at The Nostalgia Test. Tune in next time because you never know what pop culture will pop up on The Nostalgia Test.